Fab. Okay, I think we're ready to go. So thank you to everyone that's attending today's SLA Europe webinar on predatory publishing. I'm delighted to welcome Lorraine and Catherine from Think, Check, Submit to share more about their work and how librarians and information professionals can support researchers in identifying trusted journals, as well as advocate for active publishing choices. So back to today's webinar, and actually to introduce our two speakers. So first up, we've got Lorraine Estelle. She manages the communications administration for Think, Check, Submit. She's also a consultant working in the areas of open access and equitable access to content and publishing. Our second speaker is Catherine Stephan, who works as the Research Engagement Librarian at Liverpool John Moores University, LJMU, with responsibilities for developing training and outreach in the areas of research support and for staff and PGRs. She's an advocate for open research and responsible metrics and is a co-organiser of Open Research Week with LJMU, University of Liverpool and Edge Hill University. Catherine is also the librarian representative for Think, Check, Submit, that's a bit of a tongue twister, and is also on the UK SG Outreach and Engagement Subcommittee. Fab, so those are our two speakers. I'm going to check if there's any more people waiting to join. So now I'm going to step back. I'm actually going to make Catherine host and hand over.
Well, thank you very much for your welcome and great to meet everybody here today. I am Lorraine Estelle, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about Think, Check, Submit. And a very important part of the work of Think, Check, Submit, I'm having the tongue twister moment myself now, is how we work with librarians, because librarians can advocate for active publishing choice and support researchers in identifying trusted journals and publishers. So very much we are about working with the library community in supporting researchers. So in our discussion today, I will be talking about the problem of predatory publishing and why Think, Check, Submit provides tools to help researchers. But then we're going to move on to Catherine's part of the presentation, which I think you will all find incredibly helpful, because she's going to share with us the practical examples of how she's used Think, Check, Submit when helping researchers in her institution make publishing choices and really do that due diligence to make sure that they are finding trusted publishers. And of course, we look forward to hearing your questions and experiences and discussing them with you at the end. Oh, thank you. Yeah, if it looks like a duck, it must be a duck. That's quite a famous old saying. And this is one of the problems that we face in the modern world. Many things look like they are reputable journals, reputable publishers for books, but researchers cannot trust everything that looks like a journal or book publisher. And predatory journals are generally set up to make money by charging authors to publish their articles. Now, there is nothing wrong with that model for open access, charging article processing charges. But there is a problem if you make those charges and you don't provide the services in exchange. You don't run proper peer review. You don't index your content properly. So that's what predatory publishers do. Set up the journals, take the money, but don't provide the services. And increasingly, we are seeing book publishers as well, predatory book publishers set up to make money in the same way, without proper peer review, without proper editorial and production support. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So the characteristics of predatory publishers: misleading information. Often they will claim impact factors, all sorts of things that are not true. They'll claim, for example, that they're indexed in services, and again, very likely not to be true. One of the other things that predatory publishers do, and it can make it quite difficult to spot them, is that they choose names which are very similar to those of reputable journals or reputable publishers. So it's quite easy to get confused. And honestly, it happened to me recently. I once wrote a book chapter for a very, very reputable large publisher, and I had an email, and it was so similar. I was really taken in the name they were using, and it was only right at the end of reading this email I thought something fishy here. So they really are tricky to spot sometimes, and it's not just on their websites. Of course, they'll have social media as well, using logos that are similar to reputable publishers. So it really does take a lot of care to spot them. And even experienced researchers get taken in. As I said, it happened to me. And there is a sense, oh, we can spot these predatory publishers. They can't spell, and they always say, oh, dear esteemed Professor Estelle, would you like to write for us? Some of them are very sophisticated. So why are these predatory publishers a problem? Well, they're a problem in lots of ways. I mean, first of all, of course, taking money from researchers to provide a service and then not doing it, or not doing it properly, is a problem in itself. But it's a wider problem. Unchecked research, publishing research which hasn't been checked properly, which hasn't been peer-reviewed, can give it undeserved credibility. And there is always the danger that others would try to build on this unchecked research. And also, unsound articles may mislead the public who find that information online and reduce public trust in science. And, you know, we have so many examples about, in our modern world, of this sort of misinformation. And you can really see how there is so much danger in having material out there that is presented as if it's checked and peer-reviewed, and it's not sound, and people trust it. And it also harms the research community. And if a researcher is published in one of these journals or one of these book publishers, that can actually harm their reputation. So they're publishing to build their careers, to enhance their reputation, to showcase the research that they've done. But if their articles are found in these journals, really it can damage them in the longer term. So that's why think, check, submit is very important. Now, one of the questions we frequently get is, well, what about block lists? What about white lists? You know, you're giving us tools, think, check, submit, making us do work, I suppose. Can't you just tell us, give us a list? Lists are problematical in a number of ways. First of all, they don't build up researchers' skills in assessing journals and assessing publishers. And also, lists may not be 100% reliable, and their criteria isn't always transparent. And again, there are examples of many lists where people have argued about it. It can be quite subjective. And that's why we don't provide any lists. And indeed, we don't really endorse any lists. But what we do is provide our checklists and some other resources which researchers can use. And if they go through all those, as Catherine will demonstrate, they can be pretty sure that they found a trustworthy publisher. And this is my final slide of my part of the presentation. And it's a very, very important one, because at the beginning, I said that one of the things we do with Think Check Submit is work with librarians across the world to get the message out. And this really, really helps. And when I'm looking at the usage statistics on the Think Check Submit website, I can see that many of the researchers that are coming to use our checklists, coming to use our tools, are being referred from library websites. And a couple of examples here, just two of many examples, where libraries have embedded Think Check Submit into their LibGuides, into their websites, so that it's a resource directing researchers to us. And you can see as well in the medical library one here on the right, we have a video about Think Check Submit, a very short video, again, to help researchers. And they've embedded our video on their website. And again, if anyone listening wants to do that, get in touch, you can do it. And we've also got instructions on how to embed it on our website as well. So that's why we're very excited to work with you today, because we're hoping that you can help us get the word out. So over to Catherine now, I think.
So thank you. Yeah, so my name is Catherine Steffen, and as it was said, that I'm the research engagement librarian. Just a little bit of background about myself. Let me just make sure I've got where's my mouse again? I'm not in my office, I'm in a office. Oops, and it's jumped way ahead. So a little bit of information just about me. I'm the librarian representative on Think Check Submit. We're all getting tongue-tied by it today. And there's I suppose it's about a dozen of us, from myself as a librarian, but then there's people working at a national library, there's publishers, there's people working from DOAJ that are there. So people that are interested in doing better, really, and making, helping researchers make these sound choices. So I'm originally from Iowa in the United States, but I've lived in the UK now for, I think it's 23 years. And so Liverpool is my home, and I'm at a university called Liverpool John Moores University. We're a small-ish, research university, but mid-size, I suppose, but maybe not with as much research-intensive stuff. And this is me. And right now it's very rainy, so you'd see rain coming down. But my job is, I do a lot of work with PhD students and with academic staff, thinking about the whole publishing life cycle. And then, as it was said in the introduction, I suppose I would self-identify as an open research advocate. And each year I run a week of events with colleagues in the northwest of England, all about promoting your work and sharing your work in different ways. So that kind of gives you a little bit of background about me and what I do. Really, in terms of the training that I run, we kind of embed due diligence and kind of what we would say is homes for people's work in kind of everything that we do. So this is a snapshot of some of the training sessions that I run. And within all of that, we always talk to people about making a choice about where they publish. Depending on your where you work and your subject area, that's going to be different. But in each one of these sessions, we talk a lot about finding a home for your work, and that's going to be different. And the other thing that we really talk to people about is that there's both qualitative and quantitative measurements in terms of quality. And so we move away from lists with certain values and kind of talk about that there be different reasons why you choose. And really we tend to talk about not how things are ranked, but again, about finding that right place for what you do. And we also talk a lot about the benefits of open access. I suppose this doesn't necessarily fit under, just Think Check Submit, but we talk a lot about how sharing your work means that more people can read it and learn from it and cite it. And also that thing that open access doesn't necessarily mean you have to pay to make it open access. But also things like your funders and all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about what I do and kind of all of my training. And then also we talk a lot about what we say and what Lorraine has mentioned, that due diligence. And it's not that it's like easy, but it is relatively simple in as much as it takes time, but you do need to pay attention to this. And that's really where we think that think, check, submit can come in. So the 5 kind of principles that I use as part of my training, and also when I'm going out and talking on behalf of think, check, submit, is I always talk about that there's a home for your work, that you have a choice where you publish, that there is no list, that think, check, submit can be your checklist, and then also these final words of caution. So like, I wish I could help every person individually, and we know that researchers do this, but what I try to do in all of my training is empower people to make those choices themselves. And I'd like to think that these sort of steps help with that. So the first thing, as I kind of talked briefly about, is that we talk a lot about that there is a home for your work. And what we mean by that is that depending on what you're working with, there's going to be different homes. So this is a screenshot from my colleague Liam Bullingham, who's the research support manager at Edge Hill University, again in the northwest of the United Kingdom. This was a shot that he had. He tweeted about it, and I just thought it was really good. That depending on what you do, you might have different outputs. So you might want to publish in a data journal. It might be that you want to create an open educational resource, or that you're doing a presentation. And depending on what you're going to make or create or generate, it's going to potentially have a different home for that piece of work. And really what I do is I talk a lot less about the best place and a lot more about the right place. And again, depending on what it is you're doing, it's going to be a completely different location potentially. And again, we try to move away, from saying journal impact factor or this, and we kind of talk a lot more about who do you want your audience to be? What are you hoping to do with this, and how widely do you want this to reach with people? And I always sort of say, like, I'm not here to tell you where the best place is, but I am here to tell you what your options are. And the other thing we always say, again, I think this sort of reinforces that, is we talk to people about who and where do you read, where do they publish, and also who and where do your colleagues and people that you admire publish. So thinking about that. And again, it's not going to prevent you from necessarily finding a place that is like a questionable publisher, but it makes you think a little bit more widely about who is it that you're reading and where do you kind of aspire to potentially publish. And the other thing, and again, I know that this doesn't always exist everywhere, and sometimes it can be easier said than done, and I try to acknowledge this when I go out and do work, but I like to tell people that authors have a choice. And I appreciate, again, not always, but as part of my job as a librarian, I am here to advocate for choice. I'm not here to tell you that your department has said this. I feel like, not that I'm a voice of reason, but I like to be the one that says, well, what about this? And I understand, again, that there's pressures from employers, and there's a lot of stuff around research culture that I can't necessarily control, but I try to influence by being that option of choice. And I do think there's different tools to help. So again, it will depend on what you have access to. But when I'm showing people different stuff, and I think I've lost my my slide. Oh, here we go. Different tools. So again, if you're in the United Kingdom, like even places like Sherpa Romeo, that you can look up, does this journal, what are their requirements in terms of open access? Things like if you have subscriptions to things like Web of Science and Scopus, with the obvious, caveat that like not everything is indexed in there. And then also the Directory of Open Access Journals, which is something I use a lot of the time to just let people know that there's other choices, and then showing that people things like that you can narrow your search down by no article processing charges, retaining your rights, and all that kind of stuff. And again, it's not perfect, and I never say like, oh, just because it's on here it means that it's definitely going to tick all your boxes, but those are places that I go to. And like, if I've never heard of that title and it doesn't show up in any of the places that I'm looking, it does start to ring. It doesn't ring alarm bells, I suppose that's the wrong phrase. It's like a bit of caution. And I go, where did you actually find out about this place? Because I'm not finding it on anything. I mean, but funnily enough, sometimes we get things that are based in different, we had one recently, it was based somewhere, I don't think it was the University of Minnesota, but it was somewhere in the US. And I didn't find it on anything, but it was a completely legitimate title. You just had to do a little bit more searching. And what I kind of say to people is, what can you afford? And that isn't just cost in terms of, oh, I have to pay an article processing charge, but like time. So, the work it's going to take to put in, to put a paper in here. You don't need to make your work, pay to make your work open access, but is this the right place for your work if it's not open access? So my university has a lot of people that kind of go into not industry, but like social health and care now and policing. Are those people necessarily the first place they're going to be like an academic database that they may or may not have access to, versus it's in a trade publication that a lot of people might read? So I talk a lot about, is this the right place to publish, but also who can read it? As I said, like, can your actual audience read it if you publish it here? And I suppose there's probably people in the audience here today where we get people publishing in journals that we don't even have access to. And I always think, but we can't even read it, So, and I'm not saying that you have to like look that up. That maybe is a very librarian thing to do, but I always think like, can't even read it at this university. So is this the best place for it? And again, I just suggest it. I'm not saying you got to put it here, but I do bring those things up. And as Lorraine alluded to, like, and I feel bad if people came here today trying to find it. I mean, we're here to just sort of say there really isn't a list. They're created, and then sometimes they change. And there's lots of information about where and how you should publish, but there's just so many problems with lists. And even we have institutional open access agreements, and everybody wants a list, and I want to give them one, but they change so frequently that I can't know that list is going to be up to date. And that's what I would say about lists. There's loads of problems with it, but things like, who decides what's on them? Who decides what comes off of it? Who curates it? So is there like a challenging process if things are on there? What if you can't, some lists are paid for, and if you go on to the next slide, there's different things. So there was an article a couple of months ago about, could AI generate a list of publications that would say that they are okay? There's obviously paid subscriptions that you can get. And I always think, and I don't know if it's because I'm at an institution that doesn't have, I mean, relatively, we actually have money, but relative to other universities in the UK, maybe we don't. What if you can't pay for access to that list? Are you just supposed to like be okay publishing on those bad places? And also, as I said, just being on it, being off of it, who decides? And I'm always cynical because I always wonder, who are they owned by and who decides what's going to be on it? Is it skewed towards the owner of these things? But then that might just be because I tend to be quite cynical. So, and also, if you have a list, for some researchers, that's all they will do. And they don't necessarily, as Lorraine said, they don't develop those critical skills to determine whether or not that's going to be a good place. And if it isn't correct, is it going, are they going to be annoyed because the list isn't up to date? And there's lots of issues with that. And so I never show people any kind of lists. I always, and I also always say that there's multiple places that you've got to check. And this is where we kind of say that think, check, submit can be your checklist. And again, we're not saying if it ticks all of these, but what we're saying is if you check all of these things, you're less likely to be caught out. And so the first thing that we always kind of say is just even thinking about it. So thinking about, is this a journal where I want to put my hard work? Step back for a second. You get the email, you get told about something. Step back, take pause and say, I know that there's places that maybe I don't want to put my work, that maybe they might be questionable, they might be predatory, whatever you want to call it. Is this going to be the right place for my work? So that first thing is that think. Understand, as Lorraine pointed out in the earlier slides, there are places that are literally coming after you because they want your money. It's not because they're excited about your work, which we wish every publisher was, but that's not always the case. So that first bit is that think. And then within that, the check bits of that. And again, I suspect that a lot of us here are already doing these things. But what Think, Check, Submit does on our pages is kind of collate all of those things that you probably should be doing, but we've got it in one place. So Have you read any articles from this journal? Can you tell what their last papers were? As Lorraine pointed out earlier, is the name really, really similar to another title that might be one that you have heard of? Are you able to cross-check that information within ISSN, the portal? Again, you might not necessarily do all of this, but like if you've never heard of a journal, but it's got a super similar title to something else, and you can't find any of those old articles, it kind of makes you think, what is this thing? You know, where am I supposed to find this stuff? But then also things like, can you easily identify and contact the publisher? Do they have ways that you can get in contact with them, whether that's by email or telephone or even post? And then also things like, can you tell what kind of peer review are they using within this process? So, you know, do you know how many reviewers they might have? Are they offering, is there an expert panel that's doing it? Does it guarantee like acceptance in a really short period of time? Or I'll bring this up in one of my things later on. Is it saying you can't publish in this journal, but it will definitely be accepted into this one? You know, things that kind of make you go, what is the editorial process for this? And then also things like, is it indexed anywhere? So it doesn't necessarily have to be indexed. You know, that there are different databases. And I'm not saying I don't want it to be, I've been in sessions where people are like, it's got to be in Scopus. And you go, well, no, not really, because Scopus doesn't index everything and not everything's going to be in there. So, but are you able to discover it somewhere that it's indexed? And does the publisher have any kind of long-term archiving and preservation? And I would always say, like, are you able to look up past issues and see that kind of stuff? Actually click on it. Don't just go, oh, it's there, because, you know, sometimes you go to some of these sites and there's like nothing there, or, you know, it's a metric that doesn't check out. And then also things like, does it use permanent identifiers? So, you know, you go to some web pages and you're like, oh, it just opens and it's a PDF. You know, like, is this, there's no DOI that I can send and share. And it does, as I said, it's not a clear indicator, but it does kind of make you go, huh, this is a little bit different. And I'm not sure I agree with this. But then also the other thing that, like, as a librarian at an institution that, again, being relative, not tons of money, are they clear about the fees that they will charge? I have to tell our researchers this all the time. My university does not have an institutional fund to pay for things. If you don't know how much you have to pay, then you should not be submitting somewhere. And every single week I get asked for money. And every single week I think to myself, who is going to pay for this? Like, I don't know. I can't imagine going into a shop and grabbing a bunch of clothes and then going, oh, wait, there's a charge, you know, but consistently researchers keep doing this, submitting papers into places where they don't know how much it's going to be. And I would say, if I'm honest with you, this isn't just questionable publishers. Those charges should be upfront about what are the fees, also things like page charges, color charges. But then within this, do the publisher explain how they are financially supported? Also the currency of the fees, is it going to be something different? And then also, does it explain waivers? Not that waivers are available, but what does that actually mean if you want to apply for waivers? Again, a lot of these publications, it's not easy to find how much stuff costs. Again, that goes for a lot of like mainstream reputable publishers. That should be upfront, because we're paying you for a service and we should know how much this is going to cost. Also things like, are there guidelines for authors? So does it have a clear license policy? And I think increasingly, this is something that, again, authors should be aware of. Am I able to retain any of these rights, or am I handing them over to you? What license will be on these publications? Are you allowed to retain copyright on it? And again, I'm not here to promote DOAJ, but I know there's a new tool within that where you can choose that you want to retain your copyright. That's a cool way to be able to filter. Are there clear policies regarding conflicts of interest? What formats can you get the paper? And then also, does it provide information on metrics? And again, do those metrics check out? So a couple of times I've supported authors where the metric that they said that they were using, if you clicked on it, it didn't go anywhere. So like they weren't actually following anything. They said that they had this ranking, but it didn't show up anywhere else. So thinking about that, again, digging slightly deeper when you go through. And then also things like, is it a member of a recognized industry initiative? And you can see there's a long list of different places on here. There's COPE, DOAJ, OASPA, and then you can see different hosts that have sort of regional hosting services. And again, I'm not saying that you've got to go through and check every single one of those, but if you're not seeing this journal a part of any of those, again, it starts to make you think, okay, well, what is this place? And I also move away from like, oh, if it's on DOAJ, pardon me, I've got something in my eye. If it's on DOAJ, then like it's totally fine. Because again, I'd still be saying to you as an author, you need to check and make sure this is the right home for you. Is there a charge? Have you read it before? All those sorts of things. And then last but not least, like that's when you have to make that decision to submit. And as someone that supports authors, what I do is I always say, don't stop with one. You want to have a list of like, if you want to go all out, you could have like 10 different potential places for your work. Maybe you want to have 3 or 5 places, but never stop with just one. If you've only got one, what happens if you're not accepted there? So any of the work that I do in terms of helping authors find potential homes, I always say you need to think about, you know, do you want to publish here? What if it's not accepted? Or what if this paper, it actually could be turned into a few different papers where you talk about the methodology and you talk about the different things that you used as part of that process. So again, you can submit, but again, with like caution, okay, what's my backup plan if this doesn't work? It shouldn't be an end all be all just with one of those homes, just because things don't always get accepted in the ways that, you know, you think you would. And then these are my like 5 cautions. And this is, I will point out, just like the little advisor, this is very much me with my librarian hat on. And I probably will get like annoyed because these are things that come up all the time. I'm like here as think, check, submit, but this is definitely like the librarian hat on here. So even if you have definitely found a home, or if you think that this is a reputable place, these are the 5, I think they say 5, there's like different things to watch out for, okay? The first one that I've been having all the time lately is what I like to call the guest edit pitch. And this is where, and I probably get an email about this once a fortnight, and essentially it will go, Catherine, you are amazing. I love your work. Don't pretend like I'm a researcher. Catherine, I love your work. It's amazing. I would love it if you guest edited this special issue all about amazing librarians. And what I'm going to need you to do is I'm going to need you to find all of the other authors, and you're each going to have to pay roughly 2,000 to 3,000 certain currency of this particular 2 different publishers that I seem to be seeing a lot of. And again, what I would say is there's been a lot of, just in the last few weeks, there were a few different articles about this. So there's been a lot of guest edits and all that kind of stuff. Just to be cautious, and if you are supporting researchers, to have them consider whether or not they have been asked because they really want them and their work, or if it's because they want their money. And I know that I can be a very cynical librarian, but I'm seeing this happen a lot more consistently. I don't believe that these publishers are what we would call predatory, but I do think that some of the behavior is questionable in my mind, because I think, again, it reaches out to researchers that don't necessarily know what the costs are going to be or the work that's going to be involved, and also to universities that do not have that kind of money to be funding these sorts of things. So that's one of the ones that I see a lot, is this guest edit pitch, where it is a publisher that's more reputable, but it just seems strange that they only want them to guest edit. They don't want them, they want them to find everything and also pay for everything. The other thing that I'm seeing a lot, again, in my librarian role, is what I call the bait and switch, which is where, again, I put my paper in for a journal that I think great. And for, again, my university, we have an institutional open access deal. So I'm going to publish it open access. This is great. Oh, and I get an email and they say, ooh, we don't actually like your work, but we have a sister journal that we'd like you to publish in. It will be guaranteed to be accepted and go through. And if you click on this button, it's going to take you through. And nowhere on the email does it say it's actually going to cost you 3,000 pounds or whatever. It just says, we really like your work. This isn't a great place for it, but this place is. It's coming from publishers that we would not call predatory, but I consider that behavior not entirely acceptable. And it annoys me because a lot of times it's really good researchers that are excited about their work and they don't understand the implication for that. So again, I'm not saying, right or wrong, but just to sort of, point out that those things exist. Now, another thing that's been happening a lot, and sorry, I just moved my mouse slightly, so move it over here to get back in here. And maybe some of you have experienced this, the ask the library and they can pay. And again, this is where not necessarily the publishers that you think, oh, they're bad, but the ones that are like, oh, just ask the library. I'm sure they can pay for it. We've never been able to pay for it, and yet I get asked, oh, the publisher told me that the library would pay for it. So just to be aware, again, do the publishers really want your content or do they want your money? Maybe they do want your content. Maybe I am very cynical, and I probably am after all this time, but I still get a little bit nervous. And then the thing that we've been seeing like recently was we used to do this for free, but now we need you to pay charges in order for us to do this. And so probably some of you had heard about publishers were automatically putting your accepted manuscript into places like PubMed Central and European PubMed Central. And a lot of times it's a requirement for funders, and some publishers were doing this, and then now they're like, oh, hold on, this is too hard for us to do it unless you pay money. Again, it's not necessarily what we would consider this predatory activity, but it does, to me, demonstrate this changing landscape of things that maybe we were doing within this publishing ecosystem, and then publishers make changes. And so just to be aware of that when you're supporting researchers, that making sure they understand that, again, I'm not against publishers, but their money, most of them are money-making institutions. So considering that when we are providing support. Again, I'm not here to say this is bad and this is right, but it's just stuff that's like come up when I'm doing things. So hopefully that's all right. So the things that I would say is the 5 things that I always try to get across is to remember, as I said, that there is a home for your work. I just feel really strongly that move away from this is right and this is wrong, and more towards this is a home, but also that letting authors know that they have a choice about where they publish, even if they don't. They might not, because I know I've given talks at places where I can tell that they don't have a lot of choice. As someone from the library, I like to advocate for choice. I like to be the person that says, actually, there are options for you. And really, I like being able to provide those options to people, whether it's using, a certain an indexing database, or just going out and being like, and talking to people and saying, who is your audience and where do you work? There is no list. So again, I just don't feel like it's a great model, because again, it's not that it makes you lazy. It's not that. I suppose it makes you more dependent on things. And also I just have a lot of issues about what is on it and not on it. How do you get off of it? And who are these people that curate lists? I don't, it's not that I don't trust them. I don't know them. And I want to know that my authors and the people I help support are making the right choice. And sometimes with some of those lists, it feels like there's an ulterior motive. And again, if you can't pay to have access to lists, what does that mean for people that can't access those things? Think checks and miss can be that checklist. It does give you different things to sort of look at. And then also those final words of caution. And then just 2 other things just to sort of add in here. Even though we've done all that, I still say to authors, if archived articles, if editors are listed, the cost to publish and the metrics, even if those all check out, you still need to go and check those aims and scope and those author guidelines. Because it doesn't matter if you want to publish in that place, but they only take articles that are above 5,000 words and you've got a 3,000 word paper. You've still got to check those things. And again, sometimes that helps you weed out and make some of those decisions when you realize, oh, actually, I couldn't publish here anyway, because they're not even writing about what I write about. So all of those things, they go into that. And also, the thing that we do get asked about as well is, what happens if you have to retract or remove? And I imagine there's people with this experience, and I haven't had it happen loads of times. But the main thing that I always say is don't panic, because it does happen. If your university has a legal department, ask them. That's what we had to do. And even if, sometimes at universities, it might be that you have counsel that's external to the library, and maybe you need to ask someone in your research services if they can get in touch, but get in touch to see if there's specific wording you need to use. If you don't really want to link to that paper, just don't include it on things, and get it out there in that way. But also that work can still stand. If you know that what you've done I mean, that's, again, it's easier said than done. I'm just in the library, but you know, despite where it is, it can, you know, it still stands. And don't be tempted to ever resubmit that someplace else, because obviously just because you don't like where it ended up doesn't mean that you can take it and republish it somewhere else. You've probably handed that copyright over to that publisher, and you won't necessarily, you know, be able to do those sorts of things. And then last but not least, like, you know, move on. People do make mistakes. And as Lorraine said at the start, very experienced researchers get pulled in, and for a variety of different reasons. It's because of the publishers, it's because your time is critical, and sometimes you know, make decisions. If you had more time, you wouldn't necessarily make those decisions. I always say, you know, ask for help. Obviously, we tell that to our researchers, but equally, I ask other librarians for help all the time. You know, I'm a part of different things. Lorraine has talked about, like, on Twitter, that you can ask, you know, for different things on there. If Twitter is no longer going to exist, there are lots of different library organizations. SLA is putting on training and whatnot, but ask for help from people, because you really aren't alone. And I imagine that a lot of the things that I've talked about with people, they might have they might have come up with other people, or that's what I'm thinking. And, you know, last but not least, I would say encourage you to go to Think, Check, Submit, have a look around. And also, if there's things, you know, well, that's a couple of different things. If you we have loads of different translations. If you notice that we don't have a translation on there that we should, please, you know, we welcome volunteers. We're made up of volunteers that give our time to this. But also, if you feel like there's aspects of it that are missing or that could be improved, you know, please, you know, reach out to us. We want to support the community, but we also learn from the community, and we get better by getting feedback. And also, as I said, volunteer services from people that have helped us increase the number of translations that we have, you know, for languages around the world, really. And thank you. So that's it. I know I've rambled on a bit, and hopefully that was useful. I'll stop sharing my screen, but I'm pretty sure that these are going to be, you can share them out with whomever.
Fab. Thank you, Catherine. I'm just going to give Catherine a few moments, bit of a breather. I'm just going to have a run through of our questions as well. So we have a few already in the chat, but I'm just going to do the ones from those who registered. So first question is from a researcher who's a doctor at a medical university, and they've said, my colleague is the editor of an unlisted journal that has recently put out a call for papers. He plans to make the journal indexed by the Web of Science, but should I submit to my paper to that journal? So there's a bit of peer pressure there, but again, referring back to what you said about the caution, what sort of advice would you give?
I mean, I guess I'd be asking, like, is there hesitation? I don't know, Lorraine, what you'd say to that, like, that there's nothing stopping you from publishing someplace that maybe isn't indexed. But I always just think about who would you like to read it? And just because it's indexed in Web of Science and Scopus, they want you to think that that's that it's always going to be read by people, but in fact, there are other publications that get read by a lot of people that are not indexed in those places.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think I wouldn't not publish in a particular journal because it isn't indexed. And again, it takes time to get in, you know, if it's a new journal, for example, you're not indexed immediately. You have to sort of build up your reputation to be indexed in Web of Science, in Scopus, and so on. But if it isn't, and we don't know if this particular example, if it is a new journal, then I think I would go back to what Catherine said, and I would be asking all those other questions as well. So it's not, simply, no, don't go there because it's not indexed. But, you know, again, have you ever read any articles in this journal? You know, if that's your field, you sort of think you would have done. You know, what is the editorial policy? All those things that we talked about. So, I think you just got to really be very careful and check out a few more things before you make that decision.
And have you seen more elements where there is that peer pressure between, say, colleagues or researchers who maybe do share by word of mouth, say, hey, publish in this journal, or I am, or, you know, you should do it for your career? Is there an element of peer pressure there? And what sort of advice would be sort of given to kind of combat that?
I mean, I think I don't think we're doing as much at my university, but I think a lot of, to me, it speaks to the wider research culture that I think it's starting to be addressed in certain places. That it's like, I kind of feel like it's a much bigger issue than the library, so we totally get that. And again, I'm not pointing fingers, but I am kind of like it. We have certain like STEM subject areas where you're like, wait, what? Like, what are they doing? That they've asked for data. And to me, the way I try to combat it is just to be consistent in what we say, that like, no, that's not okay to be choosing it that way, but also, try to make inroads with some of the research, like our research support, what is it? Like across the research that we're in the library, not in the library, outside of the library. God, I can't talk because I'm hot in this room. But, and, different things like, so for example, my university is the signatory of DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment. And I don't think we do enough. You're meant to be doing more. And again, that's not directly related to publishing type stuff, but there have been times where I've challenged it and been like, well, we aren't meant to be doing this, so what are we doing as an institution to kind of help people and appreciate people in different subject areas and not kind of treat everyone the same, or to say, because I know if anyone's here from business subjects, that like our business school, there's like that business list that, if you're not in that quartile, and that's really hard. But some of the things that I've done is we went into the business school and we actually got some of the journals that they'd included in like the top quartile and then showed them in a database to show them, well, actually, those publications didn't necessarily have more citations. Like, who decided that these were the top ones? So if you can kind of dispel some of those things, again, it's easier said than done. I mean, I like, you probably come to John Moore's and someone's like, what? No, I totally publish where people tell me to publish. But I try to like I said, be consistent. And then I suppose my other hat is that because I do a lot of work around open research, that we are always trying to be like, well, hold on a second. Like, we've signed up, we signed up to, or we have an open research statement. How is this fitting in with what the university is saying we're doing, but where individuals are doing? Anyway, I could talk forever about that. So.
That's a good time for our next question. So this one's from Claire. So do you ever get any pushback from researchers for using the term predatory in this context? Claire says that they changed language to problem publishers. I think you also said about questionable behavior. That was another term that you used. So Claire's not sure what is the best term to use. If there's pushback from using the word predatory, but you're also saying questionable behavior, what's been your experience? I'll put this to Lorraine.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a very good question, and I think we've had this debate in Think, Check, Submit ourselves about, do we use the term predatory publisher? We do have some information specifically on predatory publishing on the website, but what we talk about, I think we talk about trustworthy journals. And, Catherine pointed out some practices that she has observed recently from journals that maybe, have quite a name or whatever. But so the question is this publisher trustworthy? Can I trust them? So perhaps that might be and of course, nothing is grey, black and white, even in the area of predatory publishing. There are predatory publishers out there just set up to fool researchers, get their money, and not provide any services. And maybe a sort of sliding scale of some who maybe their intentions are a little bit mixed, but they're not providing the proper services and so on. So yeah, I think, you might want to say, can you trust this publisher?
Catherine, do you want to add anything to that?
I just added, I feel like, Lorraine, I swear we had like long, not conversations, I felt like there were ongoing chats. And I did think some of it came down to some of that like semantics of like in other parts of the world, it was still called predatory. And that some of our people that aren't UK based were sort of saying, I don't feel like we can change it just because it's not that questionable isn't, it's like, it's almost like not quite, it's not strong, and maybe predatory is too strong, too strong on that. So, and that's why I think I put in the chat that sometimes I'll say like predatory, because as I said, that like sometimes there's people that you would never see on a list as being predatory, but then some of the behavior that they're doing, as Lorraine's, it's like this questionable kind of, what do we consider okay and not okay? So I feel like it's okay to use a different term, but just to make people aware that just because something is not predatory doesn't mean that they don't have things that they do that maybe are not where you'd want to publish.
Yeah. I think that's right. And, Catherine, you mentioned that thing about the transparency of the pricing. This is so important. If you're going to provide a service, it should be clear from the outset what the price is, and what's included in that price. One would hope and one would expect that it would include any color images that you might have in your research, that it would include editorial services. You're not expected to get your friend to proofread it for you, that it would be done by a professional person. So, this is about, trustworthy, and it's about transparency. Are the charges clear, and are they clear about what's included? And if they're not, and I don't care what the name of the publisher is, I wouldn't want to go there. I would want to know from the outset, how much are you going to charge and what do I get in return?
Fab, and that leads me nicely to the next question. And this is from Liz. So why are the costs of publishing open access so high? She said she saw an open access book quoted at $17,000, but journals are ranging from a much smaller amount. So any comments on that?
I think there's a couple of things here. And very often, you hear people saying, oh, these publishers, they only put a few PDFs up on a website and, they want to charge the earth. If people are trustworthy and they are doing a good job in publishing, it is quite costly. Organizing peer review, organizing, for example, if you're going to have your content archived, you have to pay to have it archived. You have to pay for the proper metadata to be created so that it can be indexed, it can be findable, all sorts of things that go on in a publishing house. So, there are costs associated with reputable publishing. Now, why there is such a variation in those costs, it is perhaps another question. And certainly, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial here. Journal publishers with a higher impact factor can charge more because people want to publish there more. So, so there's two things. There are covering the legitimate costs and also making a profit. That's not a reasonable profit. That's not terrible. But some journals, very, very prestigious, they will charge more because they are more exclusive. And just to be fair to those publishers, actually, one of the things those publishers would say in their defense for their high charges, if you have a very high impact factor, it does mean generally that you reject more papers, and there is a cost associated with that. So, there is some legitimacy there, because you're going to have to, you have to, process every paper that's submitted, and you're going to reject more. So you're publishing less of what you receive. But as I say, certainly, they also charge for the prestige. I don't know if you want to add any more, Catherine, on that one.
No, and I do think that the next, to Lorraine's point about, I remember going to a talk, obviously I'm at John Moores, but University of Liverpool, although it's not associated with it, they have Liverpool University Press, which is their own press. And they came and did a talk about, like, as Lorraine said, that like the cost of, they have an editor, if you have that transparency, it's like there are editors that are reading it. And I think they worked it out and sort of said, if they're going to make like no money at all, this is how much they'd have to charge, and it wasn't cheap, but then it is a whole process and infrastructure of doing that. And I obviously I'm just quickly put them in there, but that there are different models where moving towards that like community-based model to open monographs. And I think anybody here that's having to do anything with like the next ref, where we're thinking, right, if book chapters and books have to be open access, how are we going to pay for this? And there's going to I'm attending UKSG in a couple of weeks, and I know that top of my list are a couple of talks that are about open monographs, because it's like, how can we manage this better? So, but to Lorraine's point, I do think that in terms of journals, some of it is, yeah, it does cost money to do that. And then there's other, as you said, you're paying for that prestige. And I do think that that's, we're in the middle of, I don't know if it's going to end, but this Springer negotiations. And I think one of the sticking points was that there were some people that were still having to pay a lot of money if they wanted to publish in Nature. And that some people have said that just not going to do that. Again, I'm not singling out Nature, because I think, there's other publishers, but it's funny because each time I do sessions on open access publishing, I'll say like, and the top charge, and then you're like, oh wait, the top charge is like £10,000. But some of it is cost, and some of it is, as you said, that publishers know they can charge it, and there's people that are willing to pay it because they'd say, I was able to get a promotion and I was able to land this grant, and if I, average it out, it was worth that cost. Personally, I would still get a car, I think. Every time I see it, like a cheap, decent used car in the UK, you could get a pretty decent used car for 10K. So, but I understand why. I don't want to make light of it. I understand why researchers do it, but it is seem crazy that you pay those sorts of costs.
Oh gosh, yeah, it seems a bit far too crazy. So I'm going to put the last call for questions. If not, Amelia, yours is going to be the last, and I think this is something that's come up a lot in some of our pre-registration questions. So this is where I would love to publish an open access article, but I find that in my niche, the OA journals are in a form of a PDF online and therefore are not indexed by library catalogues. And the journals that are well indexed charge quite a fair bit of money for an open access. So Amelia said this is frustrating, but again, this is something that has come up in our pre-registration questions. So yeah, anyone who is looking to publish an article, what sort of starting advice would you give, apart from checking with Think Check Submit, but and if they don't have support from a library team or an information professional, where else would they go for that kind of support?
I mean, I always, again, I hate to say if you don't have someone from the library, because a lot of the stuff, and I'm sorry that a lot of the things that I'm saying are go to the library, I still think that DOAJ is always a great place to start, because you can search, and it will include, the Wiley and Taylor and Francis and Elsevier and those sorts of people, but it also includes, and it might be, also looking and in some of those, again, if you're thinking more widely on one of our slides where it talks about those indexing places that are more regionally based. So finding university-based publishers that are publishing lots of open journals, but they wouldn't turn up. Not everything that's open, we have an open journal service, and I think we have 14 titles, and one of them is in DOAJ. So I'd still encourage you to look in DOAJ, but also, and again, this will take some work, and I appreciate this doesn't like solve it for you. Who are the people that are writing about this stuff? Does their university host an open journal service, or is there like a society that's hosting these sorts of things? And I suspect you've probably already done that, but that might be the next road that I would go down if you hadn't done that, was like, are there any other places that are publishing these things open access via a university open journal service, or because you're not associated with a university, or if you're not. The other thing that, our open journal service started a few years ago, and it kind of just started as like we wanted to have it, and it's really kind of gone from strength to strength, that if anybody is here, and we were even thinking about this with our Open Research Week, hey, should we start publishing stuff? That like it feels like you can kind of, and I'm not saying that you should go and create this yourself, but like, there does feel like there's more models. Or for example, for that, if actually I should have said this, the open, depending on where you are, but like the Open Library of the Humanities, which is supported by libraries paying money, but anyone can publish there, and it will be open access. So I think it's kind of looking around in those sorts of spaces. And again, I'm sorry if everything I'm telling you is stuff that you're like, I've already done that, it's not there. But that's where and I'll put that into the chat, that DOAJ, Open Library of the Humanities, and then also looking at some of those university-based places that might have open, access journals.
Yeah, I'd also say, Amelia, I mean, not necessarily going to work, but I have done this myself. If there is a particular journal that you have in mind and you don't have any funding to publish open access, there's nothing to stop you approaching them and explaining that and saying, can they give you a waiver? Can they give you a discount? I would say not necessarily going to get it, but I have done that with journals myself. So always worth asking the question.
But thank you both for such an interesting webinar. I'm just going to reclaim the host and stop the recording. And just say a big thank you to everyone who's joined us today.